Chosen one, nothing in your journey was by chance. Not the tear you shed in silence, nor the nights you thought no one saw your pain. Heaven witnessed every step, every renunciation, and every wound hidden in your heart. Today, you need to understand the fact that you are alive, the fact that you are here before this message is not a coincidence. It is proof that you survived what was meant to destroy you. You survived the fire, crossed the wilderness, endured the cold and silent dawns, and yet you did not give up. Listen carefully. You were not forgotten. On the contrary, you were preserved, not by the force of chance, but by the sovereign decision of God. Something greater is happening right now, and you need to realize it. This is not just another word. It is a spiritual decree that reaches your life. The Lord is opening the heavens over you, and what once seemed closed is now moving in your direction. Perhaps you walked thinking you were alone, but God was always by your side. Even when the wilderness seemed endless, He sustained you invisibly. Even when the flames of trial tried to consume your faith, He guarded you like gold in the fire. You didn't realize it, but every tear was a seed planted before the throne of God. Every renunciation was recorded. Every struggle you faced without understanding was, in fact, a preparation. Today, in the name of Jesus, I declare, the time of the wilderness is over. Heaven has already decided to fund your life. This means that scarcity will no longer have dominion over you, that spiritual and emotional misery is coming to an end. You were tested, yes, but now comes the time of the answer. The time of the table prepared before your enemies. The time when the windows of heaven open and you see the flow of divine provision in all areas of your life. Understand this well. You are not hearing this word by chance. There is a purpose. There is a spiritual reason. Your approval has already been decreed, and that is why the Lord sends me today to give you this confirmation. God will sustain your steps from this day forward. Imagine the wilderness you have faced up to now. Hot sand, deep silence, thirst that seemed endless. But now visualize another scene, a feast before you, the table being set by God Himself, overflowing cups, the bread multiplied, the wine of joy being poured out. This is what it means to enter the time of divine funding. It is leaving survival and entering the abundance of the promise. You may not have understood the trials. You may not have comprehended the days when nothing seemed to make sense. But now heaven reveals everything was preparation. The tears were counted, the nights were noted, the wounds were recorded. Nothing went unnoticed before the eyes of God. The phrase that seals this introduction needs to echo in your soul. You are not watching this video by chance. It is because you have been approved. And today you receive the confirmation that God Himself will sustain your steps from this day forward. The approval that came. Through the fire, have you ever realized how the greatest wildernesses in your life were not simply random obstacles, but spiritual trials carefully observed by God? Nothing you faced was in vain. Every pain, every loss, every anguish, all of it was part of a path of approval. What seemed unfair was, in fact, forging in you a strength that could not be built otherwise. The trials were not signs of abandonment, but of preparation. The Lord knew that for the promise to be fulfilled, you needed to be forged in the fire. Gold does not shine without passing through the furnace. Likewise, your faith could not be refined without facing moments of intense heat. This furnace did not come to consume you, but to purify. The word reminds us in James 1:12, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because, having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love Him." You endured, perhaps with tears, perhaps with falls, perhaps with doubts, but you endured. And enduring does not mean not feeling pain. It means remaining even with pain. That is resilience. That is faith. How many times did you think you wouldn't have the strength to continue? How many times did you get up without the will, but still kept going? None of this was in vain. Heaven recorded every step. Psalm 34:18 declares, The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Even in the moments when you felt farthest from God, He was closer than ever. There is no wasted tear before the throne. There is no dark night that is not known by the Lord. You did not fall by chance, nor did you rise by chance. Everything was part of a deep process of approval. When you thought it was the end, God already saw that it was just the beginning of a new season. It is important to understand. Divine approval does not mean the absence of suffering. It means that in the midst of suffering, you do not get lost. That even wounded, you keep walking. That even without answers, you continue to trust. And this is the true sign of a chosen one. Not giving up, even when the wilderness seems endless. The losses you suffered were not rejection from God, but a test of trust. He took things out of your life because He knew there was something much greater to deliver. He allowed doors to close because He had already prepared doors that would only open at the right time. Every no you received was, in fact, a redirection to the yes that was already decreed in heaven. Think of Joseph. Rejected by his brothers, sold into slavery, unjustly imprisoned. Each chapter seemed to be the end, but in reality, they were steps to the throne that was already written in his story. The same happened to you. Every trial was not to destroy you, but to lead you to the destiny that was already prepared. You were tested in scarcity, so that you would know how to manage abundance. You were tested in silence so that you would learn to discern the voice of God. You were tested in waiting so that you would understand that a promise is not a delay. It is preparation. And now, at this very moment, heaven declares you have been approved, not because you didn't make mistakes, but because you didn't give up. Not because you were perfect, but because you remained. The seal of divine approval is upon your life. Therefore, listen, you are not on the verge of a defeat. You are at the gates of a new season. What seemed only suffering is now transformed into a testimony. What seemed like the end is revealed as a new beginning. And this new beginning no longer depends on the strength of men, but on the decision of God. Your journey until now was hard, but necessary. Every fall was counted, every scar was recorded, every tear was kept in a heavenly bottle. Today, God looks at you and declares, now is the time for sustenance. Now is the time for honor. Now is the time for abundance. The wilderness is over. The fire has fulfilled its role. The trial is no longer necessary. Now begins the season where heaven sustains you visibly. Understanding divine funding, you need to deeply understand what divine funding means. When we say that heaven has decided to sustain your life, we are not just talking about material resources. God's funding is much greater, broader, and deeper. It reaches areas that money could never touch. It involves peace, direction, protection, health, spiritual strength, and yes, also material provision. But in a way that all of this becomes part of a greater plan. God's funding is like a river that never runs dry. It flows constantly, bringing exactly what you need at the time you need it. While the world seeks security in bank accounts, in human connections, or in limited strategies, heaven invites you to live under a sustenance that does not fail. This sustenance does not depend on crises, governments, or circumstances, but on the immutable faithfulness of God. The prophet Malachi recorded in Malachi 3:10 the voice of God declaring, "Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it." This is the perfect portrait of divine funding. The windows of heaven opening, blessings overflowing, abundant provision that cannot be contained. When the Lord decides to fund your life, He releases peace when the world screams fear. He breathes hope when the environment around you insists on despair. He restores health when the body already seemed too tired to continue. He offers clear direction amidst the darkness, guiding every step like a lit torch in the night. He stands up as protection against the enemy's snares, annulling hidden plans and disarming traps. But perhaps the greatest mark of divine funding is not just in what God gives, but in what He sustains in you. He sustains your faith when discouragement tries to drown hope. He sustains your feet when your strength seems to run out. He sustains your heart when loneliness tries to suffocate your soul. God's funding is not just an external matter, it is an internal reality, which transforms your posture before life. Remember, the enemy wants to convince you that you walk alone, that you depend on your strength, your intelligence, your own resources. But the truth is that when you entrust your confidence to God, heaven becomes the inexhaustible source of provision. And that changes everything. Perhaps you have already experienced closed doors, friendships that abandoned you, opportunities that were lost. But don't forget, if heaven has decided to fund your life, none of these things can prevent you from living the complete plan of God. You do not depend on people. You depend on promises. You do not depend on human resources. You depend on divine faithfulness. Now understand the most important detail. When God sustains, He not only gives the necessary, He gives the sufficient and the abundant. The manna in the wilderness did not run out. The widow's oil did not cease. The bread in Jesus' hand multiplied until there was more than enough. This is the essence of divine funding, not just supplying scarcity, but revealing abundance. And this is where I need to tell you something essential before we continue. If this video is being helpful to you, take the opportunity to subscribe. Leave your like and comments. Now let's proceed. Divine funding is also a cover of protection. When the enemy sets traps, when he tries to set snares, when he desires to see you fall, God raises invisible walls. How many dangers did you not even perceive, but were annulled by the Lord before they reached you? How many battles were won in the invisible backstage because God decided to sustain your life? That is why the enemy could not destroy you, even though he tried so many times. That is why you reach this point even without understanding how. That is why today you can hear this word, because the hand of God was already funding every detail of your story. And no, divine funding is not just for this moment. It is progressive. Today you taste one level, tomorrow another. Today you see small doors, tomorrow bigger doors. What begins as sustenance transforms into abundance, and what today is an individual blessing becomes a blessing for generations. God not only funds your life, He funds your mission. He sustains you so that you can sustain others. He blesses you so that you can bless. He opens paths so that you can be a bridge for others. Divine funding is never sterile. It always bears fruit, always multiplies, always generates impact beyond your own existence. And at this point in the message, I need to give you a spiritual invitation, something that is not simply a material, but an extension of this word you are receiving now. If this message is touching your heart, imagine starting every morning with an intimate conversation with Jesus. The ebook Coffee with Jesus was created for this. 31 days of encounters with the Word, deep prayers, faith challenges, and revelations that transform the day. It's not just a book. It's a daily invitation to sit at the table with the one who knows your heart. And you also get 2 super bonuses completely free. But attention, limited edition. The link to guarantee yours is in the first pinned comment. Don't put it off. Jesus is already waiting for you. The biblical foundation of divine funding. When we talk about divine funding, we need to look at the word and realize that this truth has always been present in the history of God's people. The Lord never left His children helpless. In every generation, in every impossible scenario, He stood up as the provider, sustainer, and funder of the lives of those who were chosen. Look at Joseph. A rejected young man, sold into slavery, forgotten in an unjust prison. In human eyes, Joseph seemed doomed to failure. But the hand of God was upon him. Even in prison, he was sustained by dreams and interpretations that came from above. What seemed like defeat was only a scene of preparation for the palace. The divine funding over Joseph did not begin on the throne. It began at the bottom of the pit. God funded his faith, his resilience, his ability to wait, until the day he elevated him to the position of governor of Egypt. And it is the same with you. The place where you are does not define the destiny that God has already written. Now look at David, the one forgotten by his own father, relegated to the pasture with the sheep, invisible to the eyes of men. But heaven had already decided to anoint him. The divine funding was manifested in every battle won against lions and bears, experiences that no one saw, but which strengthened him to face giants. When David defeated Goliath, it was not just a momentary victory, it was the public revelation of a funding that had already been happening in secret. It is the same with you. Hidden battles that no one saw are about to be transformed into public testimonies of God's glory over your life. Think of Noah. He received an absurd order in human eyes, to build an ark on dry land, with no signs of rain. There were no resources, no logic, no approval from men, but there was divine funding. God sustained Noah's faith, gave him detailed instructions, strengthened his hands, and above all preserved his life and that of his family on the day of judgment. The divine funding in Noah was not wealth, but sustained obedience. And this is what often happens to you. God not only funds your dreams, he funds your ability to remain obedient even when the world does not understand. Also, look at Esther, a young orphan without a title, without a recognized name, but chosen by God to change the destiny of a nation. The divine funding in Esther was courage. She received favor before the king, strategy before the danger, and boldness to stand up at the right time. Every detail of her story was sustained by the favor of God, until she became an instrument of deliverance for the entire Jewish people. It is the same with you. What seems small in your life may be exactly the door that God will use to accomplish something grand. All these biblical examples show us that divine funding goes beyond resources. It is sustenance in all areas. In Joseph, it was resilience. In David, it was anointing and victory. In Noah, it was faith and obedience. In Esther, it was courage and favor. And now I ask, what area of your life is God funding right now? Perhaps he is funding your resilience because the scenario still looks like a wilderness. Perhaps he is funding your faith because you still do not see visible signs of the promise. Perhaps he is funding your courage because the next step will require boldness. Just as Joseph did not know that his pain was the path to the palace, you also do not imagine the extent of the victory that is already written over your life. Just as David had no idea that his experience in the pasture was preparing him to govern Israel, you also do not yet realize how the backstage of your life is the stage for divine training. Just as Noah could not calculate the dimension of the deliverance that would come, you also do not yet comprehend how much God has already preserved around you. Just as Esther did not see in herself the greatness of a prophetic destiny, you also may not perceive the strength of the calling that has already been released upon you. Divine funding has never been something limited to an account or an immediate resource. It is the mark of heaven on the lives of the chosen ones, guaranteeing that nothing and no one can prevent the fulfillment of the promise. When God decides to sustain someone, the size of the opposition does not matter. The depth of the pit does not matter. The power of the enemy does not matter. What matters is the sovereign decision of the Lord. Perhaps you are in a phase similar to Joseph's, where everything seems unfair, or in a phase like David's, where you are still hidden, or like Noah, being ridiculed for obeying a voice that no one else understands, or like Esther, facing a decision that demands more courage than you think you have. But in all these phases, heaven is funding you. And know, if the approval has already been declared over your life, there is no prison that can hold you. There is no giant that can remain standing. There is no flood that can drown you. There is no decree that can destroy you. Divine funding is the guarantee that the promise will be fulfilled, because it does not depend on men, it depends on God. Just as these biblical characters were sustained, you will be too. The same God who was with Joseph, David, Noah, and Esther is the God who is with you now. The same funding that preserved, strengthened, and promoted these men and women of faith is what is already in operation in your story. And today, before this word, you need to stand up with the conviction: if God funded every detail of their lives, He also funds every detail of mine. The reality of living, sustained by heaven. To live sustained by heaven is to experience a reality that transcends human logic. It is to walk with the conviction that your life is not in the hands of men, nor conditioned by external circumstances, but rests entirely on the faithfulness of God. It is to wake up every day with the certainty that the heavens have already decided to release what you need, even if your eyes do not yet see it. When heaven sustains, doors open without human effort. Not because you have influential contacts or because you have sought artificial paths, but because God acts in silence, unlocking invisible chains. A life funded by heaven does not move by despair, but by trust. It does not chase the wind, but walks in peace, because it knows that the promise is already secured. Imagine anxiety being replaced by peace. Imagine insecurity giving way to conviction. Imagine the dry areas of your life receiving rain from above, bringing back the freshness of hope. This is the portrait of a life sustained by heaven, the impossible becoming possible, the improbable manifesting before your eyes. The Bible guarantees us in Isaiah 54:17, "No weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you." This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. This is the reality of those who are funded by God. No weapon can prevail, no human decree can annul, no plan of the enemy can prosper. Divine funding is spiritual armor. Jesus also declared in John 16:33, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Living sustained by heaven does not mean the absence of struggles, but guaranteed victory in the midst of them. It means that even on the battlefield, the flag of victory is already raised over you. A life funded by God is revealed in everyday miracles, not just in the great deeds, but in the details. It is the bill that is paid when there were no resources. It is the door that opens when everything seemed locked. It is the answer that comes in the silent prayer of the early morning. It is the deliverance you didn't even see, but that was decisive in preserving your life. And more than that, to live sustained by heaven is to carry within yourself a security that no one can steal. You begin to walk without fear of tomorrow, not because you know exactly what will happen, but because you know in whom your trust lies. Divine funding does not remove all the storms, but it guarantees that none of them will be able to sink the boat you are in. Think of the times when anxiety tried to take control of your heart. How many sleepless nights, how many confused thoughts, how many doubts about what was to come. Now imagine the voice of God echoing over you. "Do not fear, I am with you. I sustain, I fund, I open the windows of heaven for your sake." This is the foundation of living sustained by heaven, the conviction that you do not depend on the unstable, but on the eternal. And no, living funded by God is not living in illusion, but in spiritual reality. It is not closing your eyes to the problems, it is seeing above them. It is not denying the existence of struggles, it is affirming that none of them can prevail against the divine decree. When you understand this truth, something changes inside you. Insecurity gives way to courage. Despair gives way to faith. Haste is transformed into rest. And the fear of the future is converted into the expectation of what God will still do. To live sustained by heaven is to walk with firm steps, even when the ground seems unstable. It is to cross the valley of the shadow of death without losing hope. It is to stand before enemies and still sit at the table that God himself has prepared. It is to look at the walls and know that in due time they will fall. You need to keep this in your heart. Divine funding is the guarantee that your life will not be moved by circumstances, but by promises. Even if the winds change, even if the storms rise, even if human resources fail, you remain standing. Because you are sustained by heaven, and this is the greatest victory, living without fear, knowing that every step is already backed by the faithfulness of God. The legacy of the chosen one, divine funding, is never just about you. When God decides to sustain your life, he is not thinking only of your individual journey, but of the generations that will come after you. God's sustenance is always greater, always collective, always overflowing. What he releases over you today becomes a legacy for those who are not yet born. The word declares in Psalm 112, 2-3, "Their descendants will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches are in their houses, and their righteousness endures forever." This is the portrait of the legacy of divine funding. It is not limited to the present, but echoes into the future. The provision you receive does not end in you, but becomes an inheritance for children, grandchildren, and all those who are reached by your faith. The Lord also affirms in Deuteronomy 7:9, "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments." This means that what you live today, sustained by heaven, has the potential to bless thousands of generations. Divine funding is not momentary, it is eternal. Think of Abraham. God not only blessed him, but declared, "All peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Abraham's obedience opened a chain of blessings that crossed centuries and reached us. The same happens with you. When you are sustained by God, your life becomes a channel of provision that impacts people beyond what you can imagine. Divine funding is not restricted to money, but to eternal values. The legacy you leave is not just material, but spiritual. It is the faith you transmit to your children. It is the example of perseverance you plant in your family. It is the hope you share with the community. It is the word you release that touches hearts, even when you are no longer here. And remember, the legacy is not born in the future, it is built now. Every time you remain in faith, even in the face of adversity, you are writing a story that will serve as a testimony to others. Every time you trust God, even when everything around you seems contrary, you are planting seeds that will bear fruit in other lives. Divine funding also has a collective impact. It not only sustains the individual, but expands the blessing to families, communities, entire cities. When Joseph was funded by God, not only was his life saved, but a whole nation was preserved from famine. When Esther was sustained by divine favor, not only was she protected, but the entire Jewish people received deliverance. The legacy of divine funding is always greater than the individual. Therefore, you need to understand, God is not just funding your survival, he is funding your legacy. He is investing in you because he knows that your life will be a bridge for many. What he does in you today is the basis for what he will do in others tomorrow. The calling that rests upon you is not just to resist trials, but to leave eternal marks. Heaven does not just raise you up to see you standing, but for you to be a living testimony that the faithfulness of God does not fail. Divine funding transforms your life into an open letter so that the world may see what it means to be sustained by the Lord. The enemy tried to destroy you because he knew that your victory would not only be yours, but would become an example for others. Every time you win, you open the way for others to win too. Every time you remain, you inspire someone to remain. Every time you trust, you teach that it is possible to trust. This is the legacy, and today heaven reminds you, you are not here just to survive, but to leave eternal marks. The provision you receive is so that the name of God may be glorified through your life, and so that future generations may be reached. Divine funding is like a river. It starts in you, but it keeps flowing, reaching distant lands, watering fields that you won't even see. And one day in the future, people who may never have known you will thank you for decisions you made in faith, because the legacy of your life will continue to live in them. Keep this in your spirit. God's calling on you is not just to resist, it is to multiply. It is not just to live, it is to leave marks. It is not just to be blessed, it is to become a channel of blessings. This is the true legacy of God's funding, the final seal, heaven's decree. We have reached the culmination of this message. After going through trials, receiving God's approval, understanding the meaning of divine funding, looking at biblical examples, and understanding the legacy that is built, only one truth remains to be sealed in your spirit. You are not funded by men, but by God Himself. This means that your life does not depend on the goodwill of people, is not limited by economic circumstances, is not tied to human doors. Heaven has already decided. You have been approved, and now you enter the time of abundance. The tears that mark the wilderness are transformed into rivers of provision. The nights of silence are transformed into mornings of answers. The scars that once reminded you of pain will now be a testimony of victory. What was once shame will become honor. What seemed small will now multiply before your eyes. Visualize this scene in your spirit, a table set before you, prepared by God Himself. Nothing is missing from it. There is bread, there is wine, there is abundance. Around it, those who doubted, those who underestimated you, those who thought you wouldn't resist. And before them, you don't need to prove anything. God Himself stands up as your defense. He Himself honors your steps. The windows of heaven open over your life now. No more drops, but abundant rain. No more crumbs, but a feast. No more scarcity, but abundance. This is the decree. You were sustained until now by invisible grace. But from now on, the sustenance will be visible, palpable, undeniable. And when the enemy tries to raise accusations, remember, no weapon will prosper against you. When anxiety tries to steal your peace, remember, Jesus has already overcome the world. When fear tries to paralyze you, remember, heaven has already decided to fund your life. You are not a survivor, you are an approved one. You are not just resisting, you are entering a time of conquest. You are not just living, you are marked to leave a legacy. Heaven sustains you, heaven protects you, heaven opens paths before you. And now, before this word, I need to call you to act in faith. This is the moment to stand up spiritually, to declare that you believe, to seal this promise over your life. If this message has confirmed something in your spirit, subscribe to the channel, click like, and declare 777 in the comments to seal your faith. Share this video so that others may also receive this prophetic word. This is your moment to stand up, because heaven has already decided to fund your life.